Steve and Alan's Pro Tips in a Short Time Learn a Lot.
Hey, Steve.
Hey, Alan.
So, we're continuing this week with another short summer reading episode, and I am grateful you assigned me a blog post that was both short and yet extremely thought provoking.
I thought you'd have some opinions on this one. It's by one of our former guests, Michael Linsin, the classroom management guru.
Yeah, Linson has a free blog on his website, and each week he shares tips for everything from how to not take misbehavior personally to how you can freshen up your classroom routines.
It's some very good and practical stuff, and his most recent post especially jumped out at me. He titled it, The Big Lie of Childhood Trauma. Linson argues that we have perhaps overcorrected when it comes to addressing trauma, incorporating social emotional learning, and being forgiving of student misbehavior, especially since the COVID pandemic.
Yeah, Linson thinks that giving students so many chances might be, quote, causing the increase in misbehavior by telling kids not so subtly that there is something wrong with them.
Yeah, he's arguing that this approach has caused students to basically sink down to new, lower standards, and that if we'd maintain higher standards and not give so many chances, students would rise to the occasion, making all of our lives more pleasant. What's your take, Alan?
I think there's a little baby bathwater thing going on here. I think he's overstating it a bit when he says, throw out SEL and all of its manifestations, because I think the research, the data show that incorporating SEL, social emotional learning, has a net gain, has a net benefit. I think the thing he is most right about is the thing I'd want to focus on. I don't want to focus on too much on the differences, but I would focus on the idea that students of all kinds need consistency and clarity and expectations. We've talked on previous episodes about the idea of treat people really, 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 really well, and then hold them to really, 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 really high expectations in that order. The thing I worry about in this piece is that people will see the really, really, really high expectations, the consistency, the clarity, the discipline, the no excuses. I think the phrase no excuses was in there, without thinking about that individual kid. I've got more thoughts on that, but before I go any further, what are you thinking?
I really liked it. For me, as with most occasions when I will read or think about something like this, the trick for me is in the execution of it. So, how do I decide, well, this particular student maybe did have some trauma or would benefit from this, whereas that student, if I give them too many chances, it's going to be worse for them in the future, and I need to hold them to higher standards. That's what they need versus this is what this student needs. Does that make any sense?
It does. And that's what I wish was emphasized here a little bit more, because the idea of throwing out all of this stuff because we're enabling students too much, it really does come down to that individual student. And there are probably students who aren't doing as well as they could because they've been coddled too much. But there are a lot of people out there, a lot of legislators, a lot of educators who are tired, a lot of purists who aren't in the trenches, who really think, yep, we've gone too far. We need to get rid of all that stuff. And the wording here might give those folks some ammunition or give that line of thought some credence. And if you read the piece carefully, he isn't saying that overall. He is saying we got to look at each student and we got to be clear and kind, and clarity and high expectations are kind.
So, what would your advice be to someone in the trenches who reads this and has my reaction, which is, yeah, I'm seeing that this could totally be the case. How do you just throw out some of the bathwater and not throw the baby out with it?
I think you focus on the commonalities between SEL and what Linson is saying here, and your own personal experience and your own education. I mean, you've got a doctorate, you got to trust yourself. And I think anybody listening to this has the degrees and the background in developmental psychology necessary to apply some of that wisdom. It does come down to the individual. Dr. Tim always said, if you have to choose between being right and being kind, choose being kind. The advice of the person in the trenches is pay attention, build relationships with each of your students so that you can get to know who needs more accommodations, who needs fewer accommodations, or who needs no accommodations. And if you don't know for sure, I think you still err on the side of the accommodations. I just think back on 19 years in the classroom. I don't have any regrets about cutting someone too much slack, although I did do that from time to time. My regrets are about looking back and thinking, ooh, I was too tough when I shouldn't have been. And I was not necessarily all that hard nosed. That's what I'd say to folks in the trenches. Pay attention to the commonalities here. High standards, expectations, clarity of what's expected is good for everyone.
Do we run any risk when we start thinking about individual student needs and treating them differently of young Steve seeing that the teacher is giving young Alan a lot of chances, and when I do the same thing that Alan does, I get cut no slack whatsoever, and that doesn't seem fair. And maybe the teacher knows, well, Alan's going through some stuff right now. I can cut him some slack, but Steve, I need to have higher expectations for him.
I think the thing to say, and this is timeless, man, this goes back to the 90s, this approach. I don't know where I picked this up, but it really seemed to work. Steve, I am not going to talk to you about how I'm working with Alan. I'm not going to talk to Alan about how I'm working with you. Here's what's expected of you. Here's what's fair for you. Please do these things. You might see some things, but you don't see everything. And the things you don't see aren't any of your business.
Yeah.
Does that work for you?
Yeah, I like that.
I had a student once who had a terrible horn angle. And their section leader came to me and said, we'll call him Steve. Steve has a terrible horn angle. The thing about Steve's section leader is that his life was pretty good, maybe neither here nor there, but he probably couldn't relate to what Steve was going through. Something I knew that maybe I shouldn't have known was that Steve's father was a drug abuser and dealer. And most of what Steve did every night was making sure that his dad stayed alive and got about 3 hours of sleep a night. And so when Steve showed up for band, yeah, he didn't hold his trumpet up. And Steve's section leader wondered why I wasn't being tougher on Steve about it. And I just said, you know what? I think there's some reasons for that. I have a feeling that Steve really likes band. Why don't you just ask, just maybe worry about the other people in your section and I'll talk to Steve. So I talked to Steve and I said, hey, whenever your section leader's looking at you, can you hold your instrument up a little higher to keep him off your back? And Steve said, hey, that's a good idea. And that was what we did.
So you know me pretty well, and that I avoid reading the comments section of just about anything because it gives me a stomach ache. So I did not read the comments here. Did you read the comments in his blog?
Oh, yeah, I did. And what I appreciated about the comment section, and hats off to Michael Linsin, by the way, for continuing to talk about all of these things and then opening the door and the space for these other opinions. I think that the comment section does a great job of exploring some of these nuances and pointing out that a lot of Linsin's approach to classroom management is super consistent with social emotional learning. There's a story in there from a teacher who said, I have taught in a place where kids are very traumatized, and I've taught in a place where kids are rather privileged. And I have noticed that the traumatized kids tend to do better with the high expectations than the kids who are a little bit more privileged, because bottom line, in the privileged situation, parents tend to do a lot of clearing the way for them, either as helicopter parents or as like lawnmower parents, like, clearing the space in front of them. And sometimes the traumatized kids who have the high clear expectations, but the individual attention, do much better in that world. And that, I think, is both supports Linsin's point and supports the idea that there's some nuance to this. And I've noticed this too when working with youth from a lot of different types of school districts. I notice that there's a lot of capacity and like good behavior on the part of students in, let's just be generic and say affluent suburbs, but there isn't a lot of like initiative or creative individual thought and proactivity. Whereas when I go to rural districts where there might be less money, less privilege, there tends to be like a scrappiness and an initiative and a creativity that happens there, and a sense of duty that pushes kids. And when I work in more urban, like city schools, there's an even higher level of figuring out how to get stuff done, because that's what they do. So that's one of the things I thought of when I read the comments section, is that if we clear the way for any student, regardless of trauma or no trauma, if we clear the way and make it too easy for them, we deny their independence and their ability to develop.
All right, listeners, check out Linsin's blog, the most recent post, and if you're up for it, the comments. And we'd love to know your thoughts on this subject. Alan and I are basically watching this play out from the cheap seats. So for those of you in close to the action, tell us what you're seeing.
So, yeah, and if you haven't done so, check out our full episode interview with Linsin. It is still one of our most downloaded episodes, has lots of great suggestions, and you'll see why he is highly sought after speaker and expert in this area.
Good reminder. Thanks, Alan.
Hey, take it easy, Steve.
Steve and Alan's Pro Tips in a Short Time Learning.